Aloha, my name is Brad Bordessa. In this video, I want to share with you how to get a great plugged-in ukulele sound. Over the years, I've gotten lots of compliments from some who's people saying, wow, your ukulele sounds really good on stage, plugged in, and live. And I know it's something that a lot of people struggle with, a lot of people don't think about. It's always been something that's bugged me, and I've always worked to try and make it sound better, more clear, more full, all those good things, and to try and overcome the limitations of the UST pickup. So I want to share some of those things with you folks to help you get a better amplified live sound. Before we get started, if you find this video helpful, if you like what I do, please head over to liveukulele.com/store and go check out some of my premium ebooks and video lessons. These are the best of the content that I present. It'll teach you all of the great things that you can play on the ukulele with your newfound lovely plugged-in tone that you're going to create. liveukulele.com/store. That's the best way to directly support what I do here on the channel. All right, so I'm going to run through the things that I do to make my plugged-in sound good. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this is how you plug in your ukulele to an amp. That's more basic stuff. And if you need help with that, check out the card. I'll put it up top. And you can check out my other video on the basics. But I want to talk about the things that directly contribute to a great ukulele sound. Because there's a lot of bad info, a lot of people who just kind of accept that ukuleles sound bad when you plug them in, or it's, hey, it's kind of cool because I can put distortion on it, or hey, I have a ton of reverb on here, now it sounds different. That's fine. That's good. If you're enjoying it, that's great. But for me, playing live, I've always wanted a sound that was really sweet. It really came through nicely. And while it might not be natural, sometimes you don't want it to be natural, it does sound nice. It sounds like its own kind of thing, and it sounds high quality. So that's what I'm going to go over here. And it all starts with how you actually play the instrument. If you play quietly, the pickup can't work with what you've got going on. So I'm just going to give you the mic sound here for this. This is just, if I play quietly, that might be nice when you're sitting in the room with the person. But when you get up on stage, the sound engineer is going to have to turn you up so much to make those notes sound loud that when you go to strum a chord or you bonk on a string harder than you intend, it's super loud, and you have more opportunity for feedback because the higher your volume is, the more likely your ukulele is to go woo and ring out in the speakers and create that feedback loop. So what you can do to get the best sound possible is A, work on your tone so that as you pick and when you play notes, acoustically, it sounds as nice as possible, and play louder. Dig in. If you're playing a quiet song, it doesn't mean it can't be soft, but you need to play it confidently so it's going to send out through the pickup. The pickup's the limitation, and it is a technology, right? We kind of have to work with what we have. And one of the things you can do is dig in. You play those notes. If you're going to play the note, commit to it. And by doing so, you have a kind of a larger difference between the bottom line noise that the sound engineer is going to set you at and where you're actually playing. You want that to be really high. Not that noise is really usually a problem, but if the sound engineer has to push and push and push your signal because you're playing quietly, when you do go to play on something, it's going to be really loud and you're going to go, and you're going to try and play even quieter, then your ukulele is feeding back. I've worked with guys like this, and it's frustrating to try and run sound for them. And it usually doesn't sound too good because it sounds timid, it sounds small. And if you can really juice your notes going into the pickup, you're going to have a better sound. I play super hard, I play super strong, and good thing, bad thing, you decide. But we get stuck in the trap of thinking that if you play something quietly, it's going to sound soft, and anything that's loud by default can't sound soft or gentle. And that's not true. You're just projecting it out kind of at a louder volume, but it can still be soft. It can still be sweet. The next thing is the actual ukulele. This is a wonderful ukulele made by my good friend Chuck Moore. It's, world class, But I don't honestly know how much of a difference a wonderful ukulele makes with the pickup. Once you get to the pickup, it's really just picking up the strings and how they ring. And I think that you get to a certain point, maybe you're spending $500, $600, $700 on an ukulele with a pickup. As long as the pickup is high quality and the pickup is installed correctly, I think you're going to be in a good place and have a nice starting point. But really, one of the bottom line things that you need to pay attention to whenever you're doing anything with recording or live sound is gold in, gold out. That's the rule. If your ukulele sounds bad going into the system, there's no amount of pedals or magic you can do in post to make it sound better. It just doesn't happen. It's way better to have a little bit nicer ukulele and to get a good pickup. I'm a bags guy. I like the LR bags. I had the 5.0 for a long time. Now I have the Element because I didn't like how the 5.0 would crunch. It doesn't have a lot of headroom because it's only in that 3-volt watch battery. I'm more of a fan of the 9-volt, having the heavy 9-volt in my ukulele. I would rather have that weight and a little bit more headroom because I made the switch in this ukulele from a 5.0 to the Element, and I noticed immediately how much kind of stronger, there was more elbow room for my sound. It wasn't like if I would really dig in, it wouldn't go rah, rah, and kind of crap out on the way through. It's just strong the whole way. There's lots of headroom, and there's a little more low end, which you don't really need as an ukulele player, but having it there, I think it's better to have it there and cut it out than to have it really scooped off like the 5.0 where you can't put it back if you decide that you do want it. So my vote for the best professional sounding pickup is the LR Bags Element. That said, you can get a nice sound from lots of different pickups. Main thing is, in the real world, you're probably going to want that under saddle transducer. The soundboard ones sound natural and they sound nice, but in my experience, they're a lot more headache than they're worth. You catch a lot of movement noise on the soundboard as you touch, as you move your arm, and they tend to feed back more. So at the end of the day, as a performing ukulele player, this is just me, how I want to approach it. I'm going to want the undersaddle transducer and have the LR bags. Just my 2 cents. And so I'll put a link in the description or in the cards so you can see my comparison of the 5.0 and the Element pickup as I went kind of before and after, and I changed the pickup in this actual ukulele. But those are my 2 cents on pickups. Kind of jumping ahead to the end of the line, when you plug in, you want to be plugged into a full range, nice PA speaker, or at worst case scenario, an acoustic amplifier. This is just a pet peeve of mine, but people, they plug in their ukulele and they say, wow, it sounds great. And they're plugged into an electric guitar amp. And I have to feel like in my heart of hearts, no, it sounds really bad because it's thin. It's meant for reproducing an electric guitar sound, which is very different. What you want is full range, be it like a bass amp or a keyboard amp or an acoustic amp. Those are the worlds you want to be in, not electric guitar amps. So you might think oh, I got the little Boss Katana or whatever, or a Roland Microcube. I have the Roland Microcube. It's a great little amp, but it sucks for ukulele if you want to be acoustic and clean. It's meant for electric guitar. It has a very certain sound. So get that full range PA speaker, put your signal straight through a PA or an acoustic amp. That's how it's supposed to be if you want it to sound clean and high quality. Hi-fi. Otherwise, it's going to sound thin and like it's, about this wide coming out of the speaker at you with a real harsh sort of a sound. Okay, so I'm going to move into the box. Cool thing is with the pedal setup that I run, I use the HX Stomp, and it allows me to plug in, and it's going to allow me to kind of show my settings a little bit easier on a screen capture than if I'm trying to hold the camera on the pedal board. I will also put a picture of the pedal board, though. It doesn't really matter, but that one device, the HX Stomp by Line 6, is what I've been using for a lot of years. It's the longest I've used any pedal as my main jam, just because it's really good and it does what I needed to do. It does all this stuff. Okay. And so what I want to do is walk you through the signal chain that I use here in this HX Edit program, which is where I can see all my settings, see what's going on inside the plugin. So to get started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bypass everything and play my ukulele so you can hear exactly what it sounds like completely dry with nothing on the sound. And for that demo, whenever I'm showing something in here, what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and edit out the mic audio. So all you're hearing is the direct sound. Now, here is something to be mindful of, to pay attention to, is that when you are plugging in directly and you're only hearing a recorded direct sound, like for me, I'm listening back in my headphones, what you are hearing is kind of a fake little world. You're hearing it direct from the pickup to your ears. There's no room in there for the sounds to come out of a speaker and breathe in a room, right? That's why it sounds so nice when you're sitting in a room listening to somebody play. You hear the ukulele, you hear the direct sound, but you also hear the room happening around you. You hear the reflections of the different notes bouncing off there and coming to your ear and bouncing off there and coming to your ear. It really changes the sound dramatically. Okay, and so the first thing that you're going to notice when you listen to this is it sounds extremely 2D. It sounds like it's just a piece of wallpaper when I play my ukulele. And so usually we're used to hearing recorded instruments on an album with a mic. The instrument is recorded with a microphone, and so the sound comes out of the instrument, and some of the direct sound goes into the mic, but a lot more of it goes out into the room, and then you hear some of that coming back into the mic. And so that is something that we lose. So right at the beginning of the chain, something that I put on my ukulele is a little ambient verb, a little reverb that creates a little slap sound, almost unnoticeable, but it kind of makes it a little bit more 3D when you go to play. Here it is with it on. And so it takes it and it kind of separates it out. Here it is off. And on. Really subtle, but it's here. I got just a little itty bitty pre-delay. It says it's a 12-meter room. I don't know what that means, but basically what I'm doing is I'm like rolling off a lot of the highs so the reverb sits way in the back, but it just gives your ear something to kind of relate to, because a lot of hearing with the human ear has to do with reflections. As soon as you take away the reflections, it sounds really unnatural to hear anything, and you can't like tell what is going on. It's hard to understand. You know, it's like playing your ukulele outdoors, maybe with a group or with a friend, and if the sound is just going out across a field, there's not really any reflections coming back to you, and it can be really hard to hear the other players. Whereas if you're in a room, there's lots of reflections, there's lots of information for your ears to kind of hang on to. A lot of times it's a lot easier to hear what the next guy is doing more precisely because of that information. That's just how our brains process the sound, is inside a space. So when you take that away with the direct ukulele sound, it helps when it's coming back out of a PA speaker, because then the sound is alive in a room again. But before that, you know, a lot of times we're used to hearing a recorded instrument that has a mic in front of it. And from that mic, you're going to get a little bit of ambience. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. Okay, the next thing that happens is you'll notice that I have the reverb here. This is the ambient reverb. And then I split the signal. And I believe it's not quite half-half. It's like, I don't know, 60-40, something like that. 70-30 split, where I'm splitting to an impulse response and to an EQ. Because when you plug in, when you have a live ukulele sound, you can go one of two directions, and there's a spectrum between. You go as realistic as you can possibly get, nice and bright. You take away some of the mid honkiness that the pickup adds, and you might have a really natural sounding sound, like you were just sitting right in the room with the ukulele, like the mic here would sound. Or you go a little bit more fake sounding, a little more artificial, and you use more of the pickup sound. But what that pickup sound does is it tends to smash the sound down into a smaller package. It really stuffs it in the mid-range, and it cuts. You have a natural sounding ukulele versus a guitar, you're going to get destroyed every single time. You're going to hear tons of the guitar, and even at the same volume, you're not going to hear much of you on stage. You're going to be drowned out because you don't have a competitive tone frequency. And so it's a balance. If you're just playing solo on stage, maybe you can lean way to the other side where you're going for a natural sound. You scoop out a lot of the mids. But like for me, in my case, a lot of my performance is done in a group and in a rock band these days with a drummer and bass and an electric guitarist. And I've done this, I've tried like, I want to have a really natural sound. It doesn't cut. You can't hear me. And so I've realized that some of the trade-off is using some of those inherent sounds to the piezo pickup and leaning into that and accepting that it's going to be a different sort of sound. It's not going to sound supernatural, but it is going to cut because that's just what works. That's what gets through. Okay. But that said, one of the most important things you can do for your ukulele, like the ambient reverb, that's really nitpicking. But one of the most important things you can do for your ukulele sound, now that I know about it, is you get an impulse response and you put the impulse response on your sound. And basically what the impulse response is, I wrote a whole article about this on liveukulele.com. Go check that out if you want more nitty gritty. But basically what it is a snapshot of an EQ curve. And so what you're doing is you're actually taking the ukulele's plug, you're recording that while simultaneously recording it with a nice microphone. And what you do is you offset those sounds. You like subtract one from the other so that what's left is like the inverse. And so what the impulse response is trying to do is it's trying to take the pickup sound and make it sound like the microphone. By having the same performance and the same take, you're getting the same tonal qualities from both. And the impulse response tries to EQ very accurately to a very precise degree. It tries to take the pickup and make it sound like the microphone. And it really changes the sound dramatically. This is the same technology they use in like the Fishman Aura pedals, was some of the first ones to use it. But now, basically anybody can get it on their pedal board. You buy a dedicated impulse response loader. There's one from TC Electronics. Boss has one now. Tone Dexter was popular for a while because it actually makes one for you. But I have a couple that you can download if you want. It really depends on your ukulele, what's going to sound good. I have like 50 of them loaded up on the HX Stomp here, and only a couple of them really like do the trick and get the sound that I'm going for. So it takes a lot of experimentation, but if you get it, it makes all the difference in the world. Okay. So here it is. I'm actually going to go 100% through the impulse response. So you can hear the whole thing at 100% and you can hear what it's going to do. The volume's probably going to drop, but here it is straight. And on. A lot more high end, a lot less mids. It scoops it out and makes it bright, which tends to be kind of what an ukulele pickup lacks. There's lots of mids, but it's not so bright and there's too much mids. So that's what this impulse response does. However, it can sound a little bit artificial if you run it at 100%, which is why I do the split. Because, going back to, I need to cut through, that's why I'm not hitting it at 100%. I'm over here at 20 on the B path to the impulse response. So leaning towards more of the impulse, but still letting some of the direct signal through. And the direct signal goes to a parametric EQ that kind of does sort of the same moves that an impulse response does, but to a much lesser degree and much more broad strokes. Used to be, this was the best you could do with your technology, is you had like maybe a Boss GE7 band EQ on your board, that was the best you could do, is just sculpt it and make it sound decent. But here we go, direct first. Without the impulse response, I've leaned everything now to path A, which just goes to the EQ, but bypassing the EQ. And now if I turn the EQ on, and just if you're curious, for the EQ, I'm cutting 1.5 dBs at 220 hertz, 3 dBs at 450, and it looks like that's it. Just cuts in the mid-range to get rid of the mud that tends to, the kind of boxy sound that tends to chase ukuleles and really kind of hamper our maximum potential for the tone. But going back to where I want to be, what I want is the blend between the two. So I have the impulse response going at 100%, bang, and then I also have the kind of more mid-sounding artificial plasticky pickup sound that's going through an EQ, which helps that. But by blending the two together, you kind of get the best of both worlds. Okay, so here it is. I'll bypass the IR and the EQ. So this is just straight with the ambient reverb. Then if I turn them on, so it's a lot brighter on both fronts, but you still have some of that the pickup brings to the party. So right there, just with the EQ and the impulse response, is 95% of what I'm going for. That's really the magic. When I first plugged into the HX Stomp for the first time and loaded up an impulse response, I was like, because it was a huge upgrade, like a just unfathomable upgrade from what I had struggled with and dealt with all these years, just having a parametric EQ. It was like, oh, we have a parametric EQ. It sounds really good. And then you get into the impulse response world and you're able to take it up to a way nicer, higher quality just from that. So you can get an impulse response, dedicated impulse response loader. I like the HX Stomp because it does that and a lot more. The preset that I'm showing here is a little bit stripped down, just so there's not a lot of distraction effect kind of things. This is really just the core part of my sound these days. The HX Stomp is expensive. It's really expensive. But for me, it's super worth it because since then I've hardly bought any pedals because it just does everything and it sounds great, does the trick. And I still have lots of room to experiment with different things and try different things out. But if there was one thing to probably put on your pedal board in addition to your DI or your EQ or whatever, it would be an impulse response loader that has a mix option. If you can't mix it in, it's going to sound artificial and it's going to sound weird. But if it has the mix, you can set it to, I find like 60 to 70%. Sounds pretty good. Maybe even less if you really need to cut through. And you just play with 100 different impulses until you find one that kind of works for your ukulele, for your pickup, for your setup, and gets you the sound that you want. That is the main trick. Impulse response, impulse response, impulse response. And a little bit of EQ. But we knew about that from a long time ago. We always had EQ. Okay? From there, all the delay is it's just, I've got that one on a foot switch. So I can turn the delay on. And it's real light, but it also has a volume boost. So that's like my lead sound. As I turn on the delay has a built-in volume on it, and I just get a little bit more volume level so I can cut through that little bit more, and it has the delay on there to sort of fill it out. But the next interesting thing and remarkable thing, I haven't been doing this for super long, but using a compressor on my ukulele, especially with the band. This is not something you're probably going to necessarily need to do if you're playing Carnegie Hall all by yourself or you're Jake up on stage just playing solo. You probably don't need the compressor or maybe even want the compressor because what it does is it smashes your sound down. It takes the loudest part of your signal, kind of chops it off, leans it over, brings it down so that the lower part of your signal can be higher in relationship to it. So you're kind of making, if you have a bunch of spikes in your signal, you're making it so they're less spiky, but the rest of it is fuller. So you're kind of making it into a sausage. If you super compress or super limit, your wave file form is going to look like a sausage instead of a bunch of spikes. But this is set up kind of mellow, just to be kind of a light effect, but to bring that little bit of glue to the sound so that it's not just straight up ukulele. I'm kind of focusing it a little bit more, and it helps put it in a spot and make it thicker and a little bit fuller, which is great for the band work when I'm trying to cut through. All right. So I believe this is kind of gain matched, hopefully, to be mostly the same volume. So there's not a big difference. But here it is before, without. This is just playing with everything we've talked about so far, except for the delay. And then with the compressor, but volume aside, what it does, it kind of beefs up the sound just a little bit. I could smash it harder and it would beef a little bit more, but I don't really want to. That's nice. That seems like just a happy medium amount. Only bad thing about HX Edit and the HX Stomp is that you don't get compression meters, which kind of sucks. So like, I'm just flying blind here. I'm just using my ears. I don't actually know how many dB of gain I'm taking off the top with this compressor. I mean, the main thing is when you're setting it, when you turn it on, you want it to sound good. And when you turn it off, it's like, it's kind of missing something, as opposed to like, oh my gosh, I was slamming it so hard that it sounded like I was, inside an accordion and it was just pumping my sound the whole time. But the compressor's kind of a cool one for thickening up the sound. All right. And then the last thing is a super new addition. I don't know if this is going to stick or not, but this is a tape saturation emulator, right? Saturation is basically just distortion, but it's kind of in a pleasing way. It's really low level. It's not even really noticeable distortion, tends to be, but it sweetens up the sound because it generates higher harmonics, and you end up with a little bit fuller spectrum that you're working with. And this thing's kind of cool, and it kind of darkens up the sound. It muddies the sound just a little bit, which is good for what I'm going for here, which is not a perfectly clean ukulele sound. This is just, what I kind of envision growing up, listening to Eric Johnson, listening to Santana, listening to all these great guitar players who have this specific sound. I never liked bright kind of guitar. That was never my thing. It was always dark guitar that was really sweet and warm. And so going live, that's what I tend to try and aim for a little bit. But here it is before and after with the retro reel tape saturation. Here it is on. And so all it does is it adds a little bit of texture, adds a little bit of that saturation, so it feels a little bit more warm again. A lot of what you're trying to do with an ukulele pickup sound is you're trying to make it sound 3D. You're trying to kind of bring it to life, as opposed to being just this flat thing that is, just floating under your strings, creating that signal. It's not a very alive sounding way to pick up sound. The piezo thing is just kind of dull and boring. And so along the way, if you can add interest, add a little bit of life to it, that's where the sound is going to kind of come into its own and start to sound real, sound 3D. And that's kind of what I've got going here, what I'm aiming for. So the ambience and the impulse response to kind of make it a little bit more realistic sounding, plus the compression and the saturation all work together to create this sound. I'll start by playing and then turning it all off, and then playing some more. So this is with everything that we've talked about on. And then off. And on once again. And once again, keep in mind that the PA speaker or your amp or whatever is going to add that extra layer. We're listening to the most kind of worst case scenario version here, where I'm recording directly into the interface and just going direct. That is the most flat sound I can have. If I were to blast this through a PA in my yard and record that, it would sound way better. That's just what you tend to hear, having that reflection come back. So always keep that in mind. But that is the basics of what I run on the HX Stomp. If you're at that high performance level, you want a really good sound, or you just have some cash to blow, it's great. I love mine. I've had a number of the different Helix line stuff from line 6 over the years. It's all been really great. It's all based on the same software, so you're not like getting a worse version if you buy the cheaper one. It's all there. It's just what kind of foot switch features you need. And for me, HX Stomp is plenty. It's got the 3, and then I've got a little pedal board with some extra things going on beyond that. If you want to pick one up or anything else I've talked about in this video, I've got some affiliate links down below. If you use those, I get a little cutback, but it doesn't cost you any more. That's greatly appreciated. Just to finish things off, I'll kick the reverb on at the end of my pedal board. I only have this pedal on here just to offload one of the blocks in HX Stomp. HX Stomp is limited to 8 blocks, I believe. And so anything that I can put in an outboard pedal that sounds just as good is kind of an upside, especially since with some of my fuller presets, I like run out of blocks to play with, because a lot of this that's here is like my baseline, what I need to have to make my ukulele sound, or what I want to have to make my ukulele sound good. And so this reverb is just a JHS reverb at the end. Just add in a little plate hall thing, just so it's a little bit more 3D. It sounds more like I was playing in a space. And I'll adjust that depending on the venue. Some guys come in with lots of reverb, and they go into a basketball gym and they still have lots of reverb on their ukulele, and they're like, I don't know why it sounds muddy. It sounds muddy because you're putting reverb on top of the natural reverb that everybody's already hearing. So like in a super lively room, we played in a community hall the other day, and it was like all concrete walls, and it was reverberating a lot. So I just turned the reverb off. Like, I'm not proud that that's going to sound best, because I can just take advantage of the room reverb that I can't turn off. I can't do anything about that, but I can turn off the extra reverb that I'm adding that might be muddying the sound a little bit. All right, so that's probably way more information than you ever thought you wanted to know about plugging in your ukulele, but hopefully it's useful to the few of you who are out there who are looking for that next level, really trying to bring your sound up to that standard. It all starts with the instrument. It all starts with how you play strongly, play confidently, play into those notes and project them out, and then get yourself a good pickup and get it installed well. That's one thing I didn't touch on yet, is that you can get the nicest pickup in the world, but if the tech who puts it in is a bonehead and they don't know what they're doing, it can still sound bad because the saddle's not flat, or the saddle slot isn't flat on the bottom. You're working with really small tolerances there, and the closer you can get it, the better it's going to sound. So make sure that if you do decide to put in a pickup, that it's done right. You can do it yourself. I really only did this one because it already had a pickup. If the pickup's going in for the first time, you probably want somebody who really knows what they're doing to put it in. But changing pickups shouldn't be that different as long as you can file the saddle in a relatively flat manner. You should be in okay shape. There's a lot of information out there about getting the pickup itself and the saddle and everything to sit so that it's making the best contact that it can. But that's really important. If you're not getting good solid contact, you're going to struggle kind of all the way. But that's about it from me. PA system, good ukulele, play loud, get something that loads an impulse response along with an EQ. Plain EQ just doesn't cut it in 2024. In my opinion, if you want that really great sound, get something that loads the impulse response and it'll sound way better. And on top, you can put some sort of an ambient reverb, just a light slap to bring it to life, make it more 3D, super small room sounding kind of thing. And then maybe a compressor or a saturation if you have a way to do it. Like the Bag's Session DI has a saturator built in, which is great. I've actually wondered about getting one of those to act as the DI on my board so that I can offload the saturation block on the Stomp, make some room for something else, and also just have that become my DI. We'll see. Time will tell. Things are always changing, but the HX Stomp setup, the impulse response, that kind of stuff has been static for me for a long time. And a lot of people have said, wow, your ukulele sounds really good. Oh, it sounds really good. Oh, wow, sounds really good. And to me, that's what I'm going for. I'm super excited when people say that because I've worked really hard to understand and kind of optimize the gear, optimize the settings, and I still play around with it every once in a while to try and make it better and better and better. And the technology allows us to do that. The Helix stuff still gets regular updates, maybe twice a year, and there's new models that are added. A lot of it's for guitar stuff like distortions and amps and stuff like that, so I can't use it. But along the way, like the retro reel, we got the retro reel last year, I think. And so that's like a practical tool that you can use that maybe otherwise you would only be able to apply in your DAW when like editing a recording in post. And so bringing that to a pedal format is really super cool. Thanks to the guys at Line 6. If you like what you hear, please subscribe. Go check out liveukulele.com. Sign up for my newsletter over there. And like I said earlier, liveukulele.com/store is where all my premium ebooks and video lessons live. That's the best way to directly support what I do. And you get some amazing ukulele learning content from it. Hit me up. Be in touch. Get you down the road. Hui ho.